The narrative I held about myself in conflict was consistent enough to have become invisible. I was the one who stayed calm. I was the one who tried to see both sides, who asked questions rather than issued accusations, who waited for information before drawing conclusions. Other people escalated, I de-escalated. Other people made things personal, I kept things focused on the issue. This was not a story I told explicitly or defensively. I didn't walk around announcing my reasonableness. It was more ambient than that, more foundational. It was the water I swam in when things got difficult. And it meant that when a relationship was going badly, my working assumption was structured from the beginning around the question of what the other person was doing, not what I was. Her name is Patrick, I should say, and we worked together for 3 years in a team of 8 people. He was meticulous, thorough, difficult to move once he had formed a position. I found him exhausting in a way I was skilled at not expressing. We disagreed frequently, and the disagreements had a recurring shape. I would propose something, he would object, I would try to explain, the explanation would generate further objections, and we would end up in a loop that felt to me like unreasonableness on his part and, I imagined, felt something like similar frustration to him. I did not imagine, for a significant period of time, what it felt like from his side. That was not an oversight I was aware of. I believed I was doing the work of imagining it. I believed I was the kind of person who did that work. But there is a difference between believing you are considering another person's perspective and actually doing it, and the difference showed up in a specific way. When I imagined Patrick's perspective, I consistently arrived at versions that made me right. This should have been a signal. It wasn't, for a long time, because the conclusions felt like the product of genuine reflection rather than the reflection itself being structured to produce them. The day I want to describe was a meeting about a project timeline. I had proposed a revised schedule. Patrick had objections to 2 of the milestones. I responded to the objections. He responded to my response. The exchange lasted 18 minutes in a meeting that had other people in it, and by the end of it nothing had been resolved and the tension in the room was specific and uncomfortable. Afterward, one of our colleagues, her name is Anna, and she had the particular quality of someone who sees clearly and speaks slowly, stopped me in the hallway. She said, "Can I tell you something that might be hard to hear?" What Anna said was not a complete accounting. She was not indicting me or delivering a verdict. She said, in the measured way of someone choosing words with care, that when Patrick raised concerns in meetings, my responses often came before he had finished speaking, and that the speed of my responses had a quality, not aggressive, she was clear about that, but dismissive. That I was responding to where I predicted the objection would go rather than where it actually went. And that this had a cumulative effect, over the course of 3 years of meetings, that Patrick was probably carrying. I didn't argue. That is the thing I am most grateful for in my behavior in that hallway. Something in me understood that arguing would be the same move that Anna was describing, the immediate counter, the reframe, the arriving at my position before taking in the information fully. So I said thank you, and I went to my desk, and I sat with it. Sitting with it was uncomfortable in a way that surprised me. The discomfort was not the ordinary discomfort of being criticized. It was the specific discomfort of having a narrative disrupted. I had spent 3 years in a working relationship with a framework for understanding that relationship, and Anna had introduced information that did not fit the framework. The framework said I was the reasonable one. The new information said, what if the reasonableness was something you were telling yourself while actually doing something else? I reviewed the pattern that Anna had described with honesty rather than defense. I could see it. The speed of my responses in meetings with Patrick, I could see, in memory, that speed. I had told myself it was efficiency, clarity, having thought through the issue carefully enough to engage quickly. But I could also see, if I looked at it from where Patrick was sitting, how it might land as being talked over. As a conversation partner who had already decided the outcome before the conversation had properly begun. What was harder to see, and what took longer, was the deeper layer of what I had been doing. The speed, the preemptive responding, these were patterns, but patterns have functions, and the function here was not efficiency. The function was control. In conflict, I was most comfortable when I could manage the shape of the exchange, when I could move quickly enough that the conversation followed my lead rather than finding its own terrain. And Patrick, who was meticulous and slow and unwilling to be moved quickly, was a constant disruption to that control. My frustration with him was not, as I had told myself, frustration with unreasonableness. It was frustration with someone who would not let me run the dynamic. This is not a flattering thing to understand about yourself. It is, in fact, significantly less flattering than the narrative it replaced, the narrative of the calm, measured person trying to work with someone difficult. The replacement story has a different protagonist, someone who was managing conflict in a way that served their own comfort rather than the resolution of the actual problem, and who had been telling themselves a cover story about it for 3 years. I did something I had not done before. I asked Patrick if we could talk. Not about the timeline, not about any specific work issue. I told him that I had received some feedback about how I engaged in our disagreements and that I thought the feedback was accurate, and that I was sorry for the pattern. I did not ask him to validate the apology. I did not ask him to share responsibility or to enumerate the ways in which he had also contributed to the dynamic. I said what I had done and I stopped. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he appreciated it. That it had been a frustrating few years. That he had found himself dreading meetings when I was in them, and that he had started wondering whether the problem was something about him, whether he was too slow, too resistant, not good enough at advocacy. The possibility that it was something I was doing rather than something he was doing had not been where his mind went, because I had always seemed like the calm one. This landed harder than the feedback from Anna. He had absorbed the story I was projecting. My performed reasonableness had not just protected my own image, it had given Patrick a version of events in which the dysfunction was his. I had not only been telling myself a false story. I had been exporting it. The relationship with Patrick did not become easy after that conversation. But it became honest. We found a different way to be in disagreement that was slower and more real. He started to trust that I was actually listening, because I was. And I started to understand that meticulous, thorough, slow to move could be described differently, careful. Careful is a different word. The description you choose reflects what you were trying to do with it. I am still the person who prefers to stay calm. I still value de-escalation. But I no longer confuse those preferences with evidence about where the fault lies when something is going wrong. The reasonable one story was doing something for me. It was keeping me comfortable and keeping the scrutiny off. And it cost both of us, him more than me, 3 years of unnecessary friction. Naming your own contribution is not a performance of humility. It is just looking at what is actually there. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real. Do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable, it builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.